Hi everybody and welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Alicia and today I'll be going over some of the books that I DNF'd or did not finish this past summer. I do want to preface this video by saying that if I do mention any of your favorite books, I'm not trying to personally attack them or you. We just have different reading taste, and for some of these I actually didn't finish them, not necessarily because I didn't like them or the concept. I just wasn't in the right headspace or it wasn't the right time for me to read them. So if there are any books here that you love, please do let me know in the comments below if I should give them a second chance either later on this year or early next year. I do want to apologize if you hear weird noises in the back. My dog is very vigorously eating a bone right now, and I don't know how to make her stop because then she'll just start playing with her squeaker toy. Anyways, without any further ado, let's get right into it. The first book that I DNF'd this past summer was Pet Sematary by Stephen King. I know, I thought I was really going to like this book. I read The Shining earlier this year and I really enjoyed it. I think I gave it a 4 out of 5. It was great. I think I read maybe a third into the book before I just put it down. If I'm being completely honest, I was just struggling with this book. The pacing was really slow and I couldn't get into it. Usually I do enjoy King's way of meandering and really setting up the character development and slowly building up the tension, but I just couldn't relate to any of the characters, or I couldn't root for any of the characters. I found them all to be extremely annoying and I just couldn't continue with the book. That was primarily it. I know I've heard some great things about the book and maybe I'll pick it up, but most likely for now, I don't think I'll be reading Pet Sematary anytime soon. The next book that I ended up DNFing this summer is Midnight Sun by Stephanie Meyer. This was a really highly anticipated book for me. Once I heard about it, teenage me was just drawn back to Twilight days and Edward and Bella, and I really wanted to read it. And so I bought it and picked it up, and I was really disappointed because it's the same story.
It's the same story,
except told from Edward's point of view, and I don't think I got very far into it, maybe 2 to 3 chapters, and I was just immensely bored because I already know what's going to happen, and I know some people have mentioned that it adds a little bit of value because you learn some more about of where Edward was, and then maybe like Bella is redeemed in their eyes because she's not as annoying in this book, but I couldn't push through. The experience of this book reminds me back when I lived in a co-op. I used to collect spiders for a class where we were studying spiders, and unfortunately we had to freeze them at times, you know, to preserve the spider for class next week. So I would leave them in the freezer in a bag labeled spiders, and people would go in there and look inside of the bag and they would freak out. And some people really have spider phobias, which is why I labeled the bag spiders inside. I don't know what they expected. Although that same co-op, we once found a raw chicken in the dryer. I guess that's just life. So the next book that I DNF'd this summer is The 7.5 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle by Stuart Turton. The concept of this book was just really eye-catching to me. In this book, we follow our main character named Aiden as he tries to solve the mystery of Evelyn's death. Each day, she is going to die until he solves this mystery, and the loop is broken. The cool thing about this is that Aiden wakes up in the body of a different guest every single day, and so based on this he has to try to find all the clues and figure out who is killing Evelyn. In theory, this sounded like a really great concept, but I ended up listening to about maybe 15 to 20% of the audiobook and I just couldn't get into it. I think this was primarily my fault. It was when I first started getting into audiobooks and I just found it extremely confusing. Maybe I just don't have the attention span and brain capacity required to listen to an actual mystery book. In the past, I've only read them physically. And now that I do listen to audiobooks more regularly, I might go ahead and pick it up again just to see if I can follow along more easily now. I did end up DNFing it. Nothing wrong with it, it's just I couldn't keep paying attention. The next book that I DNF'd this summer was The Great Gatsby. Now, this is a book where we follow rich people families doing rich people things. The way that this book has been explained to me is that it takes place in the Roaring 20s when we have this dichotomy between old money and new money, and there's a lot of backstabbing. There's a lot of opulence, and it's basically a sad look at rich families in the 1920s. Again, there was nothing wrong with this book. I actually very much enjoyed the first few pages that I read. I think I only got 3 or 4 chapters in. I love the writing style. I love the characters so far. It was just that I wasn't in the mood to read it at the time. I picked it up, I think, a few weeks into the pandemic, and I wasn't in the mood to read The Great Gatsby, but I think that's one that I will be picking up in December. I just feel like December is the right time to read that. The next book that I DNF'd in the summer is Watching You by Lisa Jewell. Earlier this year, I ended up reading The Family Upstairs, and I really enjoyed that book. It was actually the first thriller that I ever read, and I wanted to pick up more by Lisa Jewell. I can't honestly tell you what this book is about. It takes place in Melville Heights in Bristol, England, and it's supposed to be a very nice neighborhood where not a lot of things happen, but everybody is either like watching you or you're like watching someone. So basically just a lot of noisy neighbors basically. But I think again, this book suffered from what the 7 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle suffered from, in that I was new to listening to audiobooks and I didn't realize that I didn't know what activities to do while listening to an audiobook. I found that doing certain things distracted me and I just didn't have the attention span before to really take everything in. So I don't know if it was because it was a confusing book overall or because I personally couldn't follow it. But maybe I'll go ahead and possibly give this book another chance because I really did like The Family Upstairs. But if you've read it, please let me know down below if you think that this deserves to have a second chance. The next book that I DNF'd is China Rich Girlfriend by Kwan. Earlier this year, I listened to Crazy Rich Asians and it was an interesting experience. I really loved the film. It's one of my favorite romance movies of all time, so I thought I'd go ahead and give the source material a try, and I just wasn't that much into the book. It's very over the top, like very over the top. To be honest, I finished the book because I was already like 60 to 70% into it, and and back then I didn't really DNF books, especially when I was past the 50% mark. I was just like, it's okay, I'll push through it, it's going to get better. And it didn't really get better. I didn't hate it, but I didn't love it. But since I started the first book, I told myself, well, now you have to read the second book. So I picked up China Rich Girlfriend and I didn't make it past the 13-15% mark of the book. In China Rich Girlfriend, we follow Rachel Chu, who discovers who her birth father is. And similarly to Crazy Rich Asians, everything is over the top. And I actually feel that the absurdity of Crazy Rich Asians is just on another level here. I don't know, I felt like both books were extravagant descriptions of extravagant wealth with loosely tied characters brought together for a loosely tied plot. And I didn't really have something that tied me down that made me want to continue the story. So I gave up on it. If anything, I wish that China Rich Girlfriend, or just in general the whole series, had a little bit more of ambition. That's all that I have to say. The last book that I DNF'd in the summer is The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks by Rebecca Skloot. There was nothing wrong with this, and I actually really enjoyed my time reading Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks. The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks is a nonfiction book. We learn about the HeLa cells, which have been and are still used for a lot of research purposes. These cells were basically taken from a Black woman without ever giving her credit or without her knowledge. And so I think it's a very important read. The reason that I DNF'd it wasn't intentional. I usually have a nonfiction book that I cycle through while reading other fiction books that I have. I just misplaced it and I didn't pick it back up. So I will go ahead and do that next year. I am going to read through it just because I do think it's an important read. So that was it. Those are all the books that I DNF'd this summer. Let me know down below if you've read any of these books and if you think I should give them another chance. Thank you so much for your support and I'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye.